All right. So let's begin. Now, the topic this morning is the changing view of grammar instruction. So basically, you have the idea already because I have been telling you that the English language teaching went through a lot of changes. Okay, basically from grammar-based approaches to communicative-based approaches, and you have learned already some of those methodologies that fall under the major categories or instructional options. So for today's objectives, you have to survey the changes in teaching grammar in terms of major teaching methodologies used over time. Okay. And explain the features that characterize grammar based approaches and communicative based approaches, focus and form, sorry, and their limitations and criticisms. So we will have to criticize or evaluate what basically are the loopholes or the downsides of those approaches or major approaches. Although we will also emphasize their strengths because that's part of their characteristics. Okay, so changes in grammar teaching. Now, the thing here is why is grammar instruction really controversial in English language teaching? So it's already a given fact that grammar is really fundamental to language. Okay. And of course, when you think about language, language without grammar does not exist. Okay. And so language pedagogy was really controversial due to the debate on basically the role of grammar instruction in English language teaching. And before, the controversy has always been about whether to teach grammar explicitly or implicitly. So you can see there the definition. Explicit instruction is something to do with the deductive approach, that is to teach students are given the rule and then apply it to different examples, as you know that. And then implicit instruction, that is students infer the rule or make generalizations from a set of examples. So that has always been the debate about the role of grammar teaching. So how do we teach best grammar if grammar is really central to English language teaching? And the changes in the language pedagogy have something to do with the theoretical and empirical developments in the field. So when you say theoretical, this is something to do with how linguists or how educators in the language pedagogy really think about or really thought before about how it's supposed to be taught, considering the different SLA theories that we know, okay, based on how learners actually learn the first language. That's always been the case in language pedagogy. This is also a relevant question as to whether to teach grammar explicitly and implicitly. Which grammar should we teach as English teachers? Should we teach NAE, that's the North American English, British grammar, or the world Englishes? So you have the three different major um, major varieties, because you have the North American, you have the British grammar, or the world Englishes. Okay, and you know that world Englishes cover or include a lot of varieties of the English language, whether it's a variety of NAE or a variety of British English. Okay, so which do you think should we use as language teachers, based on your um, perspective or personal choice? Okay, what should we teach then? Any ideas? You are you trying to say something, Villanueva, because you're muted?
Good morning, Miss. Is my audio clear?
Yes.
Um, I believe that for Philippines exclusively, we must teach or we must utilize the American English, as we were colonized by the Americans and not British. I had this encounter with my English teacher in high school, where I used a British spelling of the word maneuver in our class, and it wasn't a reprimand, but I was corrected. I was advised to use the English spelling of that particular word because we were not colonized by the British, not same as the India and other countries there, but we're colonized by the Americans, and so we'd have to utilize American English being the father or parent of the Philippine English.
Okay, anyone would like to add, negate Villanueva's idea? Yes, Texon?
Um, for me, I would personally choose the world Englishes because language, especially the medium of English, can vary from country to country, and I do not really conform with the idea that there is only one standard of correct English that all students should adhere to, because what will the other countries in Cashier's centric concentric model would say? And I think all of them too, even though they're not very proficient native speakers, they're trying their best to learn the variety of English. So I think with the English curriculum in the Philippines, we should at least adapt and incorporate some tenets of the world Englishes, the variety of Englishes that from China, for instance, from the Philippine English variety, what else, and the other things. Once we know that, we can actually learn to not only learn efficiently the language communicatively in different contextual situations, but we'd also learn to acknowledge the different lingua cultures that are associated as we learn the second language. And it goes to say that this is very beneficial not only for Filipinos but also for other countries or speakers that are not native speakers of the English, but they are also trying to learn the second language their in the best way that they can. And other countries too, they're implementing English as a foreign language, not only politically and economically, but also to um, to use it as a social context to communicate with other countries all over the globe, especially in the first inner circle of Catcher's model. Yeah.
That's true. Okay. Villanueva, would you like to negate that? Or Lesna would like to say something. Okay, I'll come back. I'll get back to you, Villanueva.
So I stand with Villanueva Miss that we should somehow learn American English because aside from the Philippine English is rooted to the American English since we are colonized by the Americans. It is easier for us to understand American English because it is already adopted in our classrooms, and also the American English is considered as for me is considered as the standard English. Most countries use American English in order for them to communicate with other foreigners, and we Filipinos we adapt to American English since if we go to other country we usually use American English. So I stand with American English.
Any other responses why you want to teach NAE instead of British and of course instead of world Englishes? Villanueva.
Right, Miss. With in connection to what Exxon has said relative to my answer concerning the NAE, I'd like to emphasize that the ultimate problem in English curriculum now in the Department of Education is the complexity and the diversity of learning references or of grammar. Hello, Miss. Am I audible? Okay. The complexity, the diversity of the grammar taught in the Department of Education. And I think that our focus here in in this course is to try to teach English in such a way that it is not complex, it is highly particular, but this particularity is can be adapted by learners in different fields. Now, if you utilize world Englishes, and we all know that different the different Englishes have different grammars. And so with regard to the British, if we focus on the British, if we juxtapose it with the English, there are certain variations and differences that Filipino students might be confused of. Maglisod naman gani og sabot sa Philippine English, how much more if we incorporate the British English and other world Englishes. So I think that it's important that in order to achieve at least uniformity with what Filipino English teachers are teaching to Filipino students, we'd have to stick on the American English, miss. That's my point of view, miss.
Okay, one last idea from Texon.
Yes. So the thing about grammar is that it's not that we have to follow a definite rule of it because there's the prescriptive grammar. The thing about World English Paradigm is it's construed as like an integral component of every specialized course, especially in reading, writing, listening, and speaking. There's even a study about it that they wanted the World English Paradigm to at least be incorporated in the English K-12 curriculum, because the study says that it serves as a very strong backdrop against which the teaching of English is set, and thus it should really seep into the teaching of academic writing, oral communication, and other skills. So it's not about learning the exact structure of grammar, because at the end of the day, it's about meaningful contextual utilization of the different variety of Englishes that we can teach our learners. So, for instance, in the American lingua culture, there's another aspect of it. And then in the Philippine lingua culture, there's another factor or component. So even though both of them are different, they both share the same goal, and that is to be able to use it contextually in different situations. And it's not about, again, the analysis of grammar structure, because that's not something that we really have to ingrain with our learners, because they're not going to be able to remember those grammar structures, the past tense and present tenses. What we have to teach them is how to use them meaningfully in pragmatics, and how to use them functionally when they're, if they go abroad, for instance, and they are in a restaurant, they will know the right expressions. Would you please give me blah blah blah, or if they're complaining, or if they're apologizing, or if they're expressing something. So it's about learning how to use them in applicatively in different situations. That is my
I
opinion.
understand. Okay, I understand where you're coming from, because you're really coming from the world English's perspective, and that you're into more on the communicative use of the language. But that somehow contradicts our previous discussion that we have to make it a point and also emphasize that grammar is really important, because grammar is meaning. Okay, grammar is meaning, and there is a need for accuracy, while not neglecting the importance of fluency. Okay, and vice versa. We need fluency because we need our students to be fluent in the target language, but of course, fluency or preference of that particular aspect of language use should not really weaken or devalue, okay, grammar, because grammar is meaning, and we need accuracy in our communication. And one way to achieve accuracy is to really know a certain standard. Okay, again, we're not trying to mean standard here as really the most or the best, okay, the best variety of the English language. We mean standard here as something that we will follow. Okay, I hope that is clear. Something or a framework that we will follow in teaching or in grammar instruction. So actually, I understand that you have really different, feelings about the question or preference, but the best answer to the question lies in determining, okay, what the student's purpose in learning the English language, okay, or the purpose in learning the English language, okay? And to what ends, okay? To what ends they will be using their English proficiency in the future. So the specific answer, of course, is because we need a specific answer whether to really use an AE, British, or World Englishes. But again, we have to start or begin with the idea that it depends on the kind of learning program that the school or the agency or the center is actually um, coming from. For example, IELTS, okay? That is also a language program. You also have TOEFL, you also have TESOL, meron din iba TESOL, but basically a majority of foreign learners take IELTS. And they take that because they need to go to, for example, the United Kingdom or the United States to migrate, probably, or to really go there just for educational purposes. And that's what I mentioned, I think, in the previous discussions that before we have this conception or contention that English was really dominant, especially the British English variety, and then you have the American variety, and that many of the native speakers have really a say when it comes to how the English language should be taught, and that before English teachers were really thought of or thought as someone who is very expert in literature. So that's the traditional view, okay? And for example, if the student needs to go to right now with the world Englishes, literature is no longer important competency. Okay, teaching literature is no longer an important competency for a language teacher in the Philippines or other parts of the world, especially that um, hindi naman kailangan na that's why there's this pragmatic need. Okay, if the student needs to learn literature, then he has to go to a program that also covers literature at the same time language use, how Americans use the language, and then how the British people use the language. So it depends on the program. But in the case of the Philippines, since we are second language learners, it's expected also that we have private schools, public schools, and for public schools, majority, of course, follow the North American English, except if the teacher came from a private school and then, or the exposure of that English teacher is British English. So she has the tendency to really teach the British variety, okay? If the teacher is really into or has been exposed to British English. Of course, we also have North American. As for the case ng mga private schools, most private schools have this standard na you should only teach British English, okay? Normally, British English ang mga private school, especially international schools. They follow the British variety. Some do follow NAE in general, okay? Pero some international schools do really impose the teaching of the British variety. As for the general public schools, we have this what we call EAP. So there's really a need to choose, okay? Kung exposure mo, if you're teaching in a public, okay, if you will be teaching in a public school, if your exposure is British English, then you can teach British English. If your exposure is NAE, then you can teach NAE, okay? And then we cannot simply neglect the importance of world Englishes. If you have time, if you have the luxury of time or all the time in the world, then you can inject world Englishes. Okay, that's the ideal, but it's not always na you have the time to really insert or inject that in your English lessons. But try to, okay, inject. Okay, especially in English for academic purposes, like for example, writing, business writing, or letter writing specifically. You need to ask your students to employ one variety only. Hindi pwedeng i-mix up mo. For example, there's a word na behavior na IOUR. Okay, and then dito naman sa kabila, nag-Z naman siya. Okay, next sentence, nag-Z instead na mag-S. So magbe-mix up yung conventions, especially spelling. So in writing kasi, you really have to be consistent. So it's important you as a teacher to introduce the different varieties, especially the major ones, the NAE and the British, and of course teach them one particular variety, especially for formal instruction in relation to the writing skills. Okay. You also have to take note when you are teaching. You can emphasize as well that there are, for example, if you want to publish a paper, there are journals that do not accept, okay, do not accept the conventions written in NAE or American English. Yung ibang journals strictly British. Okay, so if your exposure is NAE as a writer, you really have to learn, okay, what is the convention or what is the British English or British grammar convention when writing. So you have to take note of that. Okay. Although there is this world English concept already, or world Englishes concept, there are still communities that really follow only one standard of English, that is British and or American English. Okay. So again, it's up to you if what's your exposure, but you have to study the materials in depth. And for example, if you want to teach there, tignan mo muna yung language materials. If the materials are written in North American, then of course you will have to follow North American. If the materials provided for the students are in British English or utilize the British grammar, then you have to teach British grammar. Okay? So ganun na lang to begin with. Okay? Para hindi ma-confuse yung mga students mo as to what variety they should be mastering in the whole course. Okay, so that's it. All right, so basically what you can see there are the three instructional approaches, major instructional approaches. We started with grammar-based approaches, and then to communicative-based approaches, to F on F. So here, what you can think of is that teaching before has been conceptualized according to, or in terms of, number one, with exclusive focus on grammar, that is grammar-based approach, okay, or grammar-based approaches, and it moved to something or the types of exposure, okay, the types of exposure to meaningful communication. So that is communicative-based approach or communicative-based approaches of teaching or approaches to teaching the language. And the F on F there is referred to a set, okay, set of instructional options with a focus on both grammar and meaning, okay? So as you can see, there's really a shift from basically focusing on grammar and then to different types of exposure to meaning. Like that's basically the use of communicative context or real world tasks, okay, for students to really communicate using the target language, and to moving to the set of instructional options that aim to strike a balance between the focus on grammar and the focus on meaning. Okay, that's our direction today. So it's very easy for you to really relate now what these grammar-based approaches are, because you were able to learn. But these are the major grammar-based approaches emphasized in some materials or teaching English as a second language. You have grammar translation, audiolingual methods, and PPP model. So I will not really focus on grammar translation and audiolingual because you've learned that specifically in the previous discussion. Okay, so I will just talk about it in passing, and then we'll proceed to PPP model. Okay, so as you know that grammar-based approaches, you have this idea that language teaching is equal to grammar teaching, meaning to say before, when we talk about or when we think about language pedagogy, it always has to start with grammar teaching because of the traditional view of language and language learning, that language is a set of rules and structures. And so they really thought that learning the systems or those systems is already enough or sufficient to be good in the target language. Okay,